Welcome back to the Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Wu Ruiguo. In this segment, we will continue our conversation with Professor Philip Xu of the National Taiwan University. Philip, I'm going to ask you that since the end of Chinese New Year recess this year, that a much discussed, a highly publicized issue in cross-strait economic relations is the possible signing of so-called Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, or ECFA for short. What do you think is the necessity behind signing ECFA at this point? And also, what's the urgency? Can you share with us your views on that?
Yes. First of all, in terms of the necessity, I essentially hold a positive stance toward that issue.
Okay.
And the main reason is because I guess most citizens in society agree that we do need further economic exchanges and integration with China,
of course,
while minimizing all the risks as we have mentioned just now. And the ECFA, as a signed agreement per se, provides an integral framework as well as certain legal requirements to govern these relations, so that uncertainties would be minimized and the benefits could be expanded.
Okay.
So it is really an agreement and a framework based upon the already deepened economic interactions and integration across the Taiwan Strait.
Okay.
So I think that's really necessary. And regarding the second issue you mentioned, the urgency, I think for certain industry in Taiwan, it's probably more urgent than some others. For example, the petrochemical and the plastic industries.
Yes.
Primarily in light of the formation and the imminent effect of the ASEAN plus China FTA. Yes. This industry in Taiwan will be severely affected if they do not have equal access to the Chinese market. So I think for a certain industry that's very urgent. But for some others, it can take a while. And as many analysts have pointed out, the actual content of ECFA would take certain years to be fully materialized. Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, with ECFA, even if we signed it with China, thinking the words of President Ma, it's only going to be in the so-called early harvest industries. You know, those are the area, like you mentioned, that will be impacted adversely with the formation of ASEAN plus China free trade area. And given that, how would you think that our government should respond in terms of explaining that to our public, to ease the fear, ease the anxiety, the uncertainty over this ECFA issue?
I think the first thing that our government should really clarify, which I believe has been really notified in public, is that the ECFA is really a framework.
Yes.
So you know, to use an analogy, it is like the table of contents of a book.
Yes.
You don't really know what the concrete content is in that book.
Exactly.
For example, you don't really know what industries, under what terms, would be given favorable or equal terms of trade with China. These details have to be negotiated and hammered out in the next few years. So the real issue of ECFA is whether or not you want to establish a framework, as I said, for this already deepened economic interactions with China.
Precisely.
So that's really a key point that the government should clarify to our citizens, so that we will not be immersed in the useless and the lingering debate of, for example, whether or not we need a referendum or not. Okay. The second thing I think our government should clarify is that the government, I guess, is willing to listen to the opinions of the public and to engage in various forms of formalized exchange of opinions. For example, we could have more legislative hearings, for example.
Yes.
And the government could also hold some sort of extra institutional public affairs conference to focus on issues specifically on ECFA like this. Okay. For example, in the past, we have this so-called National Affairs Conference, 国事会议. Okay. Things like this could be held again. Whether or not a referendum or a legislative passing is really necessary can be discussed later. But I think the government should clarify the point that it is willing to listen to the opinions, different opinions of the people, and to encourage debates among the civil society within itself. Yes, I think that's the two things I would emphasize.
Okay.
Yes.
And we know that one thing the opposition has been accusing of the government, especially in the economic policy area, is that we're putting all the eggs, quote unquote, all the eggs in one basket. They don't like to see the over-dependence on the Chinese market. I certainly think the possible signing of ECFA will deepen and make that not just a probability but a reality. That Taiwan is completely dependent on the Chinese economy. But given that, that's why the opposition has been saying about holding a referendum possibly on the signing of ECFA. But I think a very effective way to rationalize this point with the opposition will be that if we sign the ECFA with China, that we can indirectly, with the structure of agreement with enter into with China, that we can indirectly through the agreement sign something similar to a FTA with other third countries. For example, maybe Singapore in ASEAN or EU or even the United States. Maybe not using the term free trade agreement because it has political connotation that would upset Beijing. But in terms of substance, maybe like a TIFA with the U.S. or with the European Union, the trade enhancement measures, something similar with FTA, but not in name, but in terms of the essence. Do you think that maybe with the signing of ECFA with China, that we can achieve that goal of indirectly being part of the regional economic integration that's taking place in Asia?
Yes, I think I completely agree with what you said.
Okay.
Indeed, and the government has explicitly stated this potential long-term effect, that it could, the ECFA with China could pave the way for the indirect access or the long-term establishment of de facto FTAs with all the other national economies.
Yes.
That's indeed very important. And also, I would suggest that the fear of egregious economic dependence on China is a permanent dilemma, but not only for the Taiwanese society, almost for all the national economies in China's neighboring countries.
Yes.
And that's another issue that we should emphasize. There is a fact that China has actually posed a sort of economic challenge or made up a economic reality that has been essentially unprecedented in the human economic history, in the sense that it possesses comparative advantage almost from the most labor-intensive to the most capital or technology-intensive industries. And so all of its neighboring countries are feeling this threat. It's not only us. So I think this is something that not only the government or the parties, but all the citizens should really pay attention to. And there's really no need for unnecessary panic.
Okay. And also one other thing that we've seen a lot of changes that has taken place since President Ma Ying-jeou came to office is so-called the more pragmatic and flexible way in terms of how we conduct ourselves on the international stage. Of course, in the foreign policy area, we have the so-called flexible diplomacy. We maintain the diplomatic truce with Beijing. But also in the economic domain, we also see some flexibility that we have never seen before. Maybe just a year earlier, that would have been unthinkable. For example, the 9 agreements that were entered into between ARADs in China and also CEF in Taiwan, and also the one joint declaration. How would you then recommend to the government, in terms of being a long-term observer of cross-strait relations, how can we use this flexible approach in terms of achieving the most economic space and maneuverability in our relations with China as we deepen our economic ties?
Well, first of all, I think my recommendation would be along the line that we just mentioned, that we want to use these bilateral agreements as the foundation for make Taiwan more globalized and more diversified in terms of economic integration with the other national economies. So it's really the first step in a long-term sequence. So, and I believe that's an action plan that's been already on the mind of government.
Yes.
But it's not only about action. As a matter of fact, I think the government should make it more explicit in terms of explaining this to the citizens to appease the problems of unnecessary fear. The second recommendation, I think, would be that, which is actually something our government has been already doing. While we are framing all these 9 agreements and the further arrangement like ECFA with China, our government is also engaging in drawing back Taiwanese investment in China.
Okay.
There's a so-called the Bridge Establishment Plan, 大桥计划,
Yes.
covering a number of emerging industries to draw back Taiwanese investors in China.
Yes.
So that's another issue or another focus that the government should make more effort about. And also, I think the government can make it more explicit to the citizens. I don't believe that there are enough citizens in our society being highly aware of this initiative.
Okay,
Yes.
and also the fact that, as you mentioned, there are many Taiwanese businesses operating on the mainland that are being very successful. I think our government also being encouraging them to come back to Taiwan and go public.
Yes.
So I think that policy is also helping in terms of enhancing the two-way exchanges of capital and also personnel.
Yes.
Yeah. So we certainly would like to see, following the signing of the financial MOUs and also possible signing of ECFA, that this two-way traffic, not just one way, unidirectional like it was before, that this will continue. I think it will help Taiwan in terms of regional economic integration and also diversification of our market.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, we're going to take a short break. I will be right back to the Taiwan Outlook. We will continue this conversation with Professor Philip Xu, Associate Professor of Political Science at the National Taiwan University. We'll be back shortly.